Well, today we are covering childhood abuse. It's a heavy subject, so I'm just kind of warning you in advance. I try not to get too heavy, but it is something that's prevalent in our world, unfortunately, and we see it a lot here at A New Day. So what I have on the slide is that because it's important, children cannot stop child abuse. Only adults can. So we're going to look at some of that and some of the factors that play in. We're going to look at kind of a game plan of what we're going to be doing this afternoon. Is we're going to be looking at the types of abuse, a whole list of types of abuse, the indicators of abuse. We're going to be looking at the victim and also those that abuse in each of these areas of abuse. We're going to talk about when it comes out in therapy. So that's when we do role playing, that's what we're going to be working with. And then we're going to look at the effects of abuse. We're going to be looking at family dynamics of abuse. We're going to be looking at how we counsel those that come in. We'll also address, I think I have a number of slides on what's called AMAC. So that's adults molested as children. It's a known category, and when we know that, and when it comes out in session, there's a lot of information, a lot of research about how to work with that population. We're also going to touch a little bit on self-inflicted violence, also known as SIV. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. Woohoo! You ready? So why do we do child abuse? Why do we look at all of this? And the real reason is we want to understand the adult client. We want to understand the child client when they come in. We want to be able to be prepared to know how to see indicators of abuse, how to work with those victims, and sometimes we work with the perpetrators. It's pretty rare, but sometimes we do. What are all the percentages? How many people are experience childhood abuse? I don't like to put percentages on that because basically the bottom line is it's just too many. It's just way too many. So one thing that I have some scripture out of Psalm 55 that I like to use because it relates to this. It's Psalm 55, 12 through 14, and 16 through 17. So 12 through 14. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship as we walked together. So that's when there's a victim of abuse, it's usually from someone they know most of the time. And so were it someone else, it would be easier. That's a big quotes around easier, because we're being injured, oftentimes we're being injured by someone who should be caring for us, and they're not. And so the other verses on that, 16 through 17, what can we do? But I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears me. That is all some have, and that is enough. So we can cry out. We can cry out with our clients too, and knowing that God hears them. And so that really kind of gives some hope in a seemingly hopeless situation. So I like to include that as kind of a preface for how we work with childhood abuse. I will throw out a couple of statistics here. 30% of those that are abused in childhood abuse their own children. I want to also throw out a big caveat here, is that does not mean if a person was abused in childhood, they will abuse. It does not mean that. This is a simple statistic that about 30% of those that are abused in childhood abuse their own children. Another kind of sad statistic is only about 1% is ever reported. And of that 1% that's reported, about 35% actually receive counseling. So those are some small statistics, really. They don't seem like they're very promising as far as helping those that have been abused. However, more and more is coming out about what it means to experience abuse. It's talked about a lot more. So these statistics are about 8 years old. So they've probably changed and gotten better, I would say, as far as how we can work with those and how those who have experienced childhood abuse can find help. What's really, I think, really helpful to us as lay counselors is that oftentimes when someone shares that experience that they've had in life, that unfortunate experience, it is sometimes the very first time they've done that. So for them to do that, that means you have learned good counseling skills, you've created a warm atmosphere, you've created safety for that client, and you're validating what their experience is. So you're listening to them, you're using all those skills, and so there's a really good chance that they're going to share that. I hear a lot that because I do a lot of work in this area, that saying comes out a lot. I've never shared this with anyone before, and so it's really a great privilege to be able to have that. So another caveat is that if you have experienced childhood abuse yourself, I just want to be, I try to be sensitive to that, and I'll try to be aware of that. Or if you have those in your family that have experienced it or are experience that, I'm so sorry that that's happening. And this class is designed to help maybe that family member, that friend that's going through these tough things. So let's go on a little bit. Childhood abuse. So age of the child at the time of the abuse. The younger the child is, the more vulnerable they are to damage. I mean, that kind of makes sense, but just kind of want to put it out there. Uncontrollable, terrifying experiences affect our central nervous system. It affects our cognitive functions because they have not yet fully matured. So they're getting formulated around these adverse childhood experiences. And it can lead to global impairment over time. Doesn't mean it's hopeless to work, and it doesn't mean things can't change. It just means that there's areas that they've learned that are going to be with them for a very long time. And we as counselors can help walk them through that, and we also get to experience their growth at the same time. Another thing about childhood abuse and how it affects those that have experienced it is the chronicity of it. So how often has it happened? The more it's happened, the greater the abuse, the greater the impact. Over time, the more that happens, there's a higher or a heightened sense of awareness, hypervigilance, vulnerability, helplessness. Those 4 things, they start to become part of the person themselves. So they develop and they refine their defense mechanisms, which we will actually talk about in a couple of weeks. But those defense mechanisms can become problematic later in life. So just basically what a defense mechanism is, it's how we develop a way to defend ourselves as we grow up. How do we feel safe in our world? And we do that in various ways, and they're very helpful, and they work because they get us through. But it doesn't always work well as we get older or we're in relationships with other people. So the more repeated it is, the little harder it is to work with. So we're going to talk about the different types of childhood abuse. We have sexual abuse, and so I'm going to give a little bit of a description here on each of these. Sexual abuse is when an adult or an older individual or a more powerful child uses another for sexual gratification or any type of excitement, sexual excitement. That can be through contact or through non-contact. Physical abuse, it's basically non-accidental injury to a child. Every child experiences accidents. I have lots of scars to prove that. But this is non-accidental injuries. There's also another form of abuse is neglect. That's just, the child is lacking care, they're lacking supervision, they're lacking attention, they're lacking support, that very comfort and support that we all need. Another type of abuse is emotional or psychological abuse. That's where there's a harming of the child's mental and social development. And we'll share more how that works and what we know about it, of all of these. No, I already did that one. So there is spiritual abuse. So that's when there's an ingraining, there's an ingraining of a sense of guilt or disappointment if you're not following a particular set of spiritual beliefs, or if you have a particular spiritual program and the child is not following it, there can be abusive behaviors to make that child follow that. So that is in the realm of spiritual abuse. Unfortunately, it happens, way too often in the church. Then there's satanic ritual abuse. That is, it's pretty brutal. It's unthinkable acts that lead to an actual, most of the time, a dissociation of the personality. So we're talking multiple personality disorders here, and it's real. It is in our community, and it is brutal. So I don't go into that because of that. We have experienced clients that have experienced that here, and it's hard work and deep work, but it can also be satisfying work. So I don't want to scare you all away from working with anyone who mentions any of these things, because it is it's rewarding for us as counselors. But even more so, it's growth and rewarding for our clients to be able to navigate through that and get beyond it. So let's talk about sexual abuse. So we'll look at the indicators of childhood sexual abuse. So what are the indicators that they are being sexually abused? So they might, and this is not just what we might see in our office, but it's also for you to notice it or maybe be aware of it in some way if you have a family member or a friend or somebody who you think might be experiencing it. So this is, one of the indicators is there's torn, stained, or bloody underclothing. So it's just, pretty simple what it says there, but that is an indicator. If we see that in a child, then we need to take notice. If there are bruises or cuts or redness or swelling, any bleeding in genital areas, the vaginal or anal areas, any bleeding, that's another indicator that there's been some sexual abuse going on. If there's blood or urine in the feces, that's another indicator. Yeah, I know this is real happy, fun stuff, but it is real. Again, we don't see those things necessarily in our office here, but they might experience as a child a sexually transmitted disease. And so that's a real good indicator. There might be any unusual or excessive itching or pain or infections in the genital or anal areas. So those are all indicators of childhood sexual abuse. Let me go back to that one. Okay. So what are some behavioral indicators? So those are just physical indicators that we might happen to notice. And again, not really those in our office, but we might notice that in family members or friends. Children, but behavioral indicators we do see here. And that's, some examples are, there might be some age-inappropriate sexual play with toys, others, or self. So what we can see, we have a sand tray room here that we use, and sometimes that comes out in that type of therapy. That's a way of working with children and adults. But that inappropriate sexual play can come out. Sometimes you might have a person that has experienced childhood abuse, and so they might try to make themselves as sexually unattractive as possible. And this is child or adult here. And the reason is, if I don't look attractive, then they aren't going to continue to do that to me. Sophisticated or unusual sexual knowledge. So if a client is talking about really age inappropriate words and knowledge about sexual activities, that's a good indicator that they may be being sexually abused. All of these by themselves are not, a one and done kind of thing that, wow, this has happened. But if there's two, we really need to be thinking about it. Comments like, I've got a secret, or I don't like Uncle so-and-so, or I don't like Aunt so-and-so. Those are really good indicators that there could be some abuse going on. If a child uses younger children in inappropriate sexual acts, there is that normal with children, show me yours and I'll show you mine kind of thing, but that is really very normal. This is taking it to the next level. Or maybe there's a certain fear that a child has or a client has of certain places that they have a really known fear about. Might be a bedroom, might be a bathroom, might be the room downstairs, or the trailer out back or something. If there's a fear about it and if there's any other indicators, good possibility they're experiencing some abuse. So indicators in adult behavior. So this is really more about the abuser here. So this is those that perpetrate abuse. They might be unusually overprotective of a particular child. Now, there's nothing wrong with that as it stands, but when we start putting pieces together, that is a factor. They may be jealous of a child's relationship with their peers or other adults, and so, or other adults. They might be jealous of the relationships. Then they might become controlling of that child. An abuser might favor a particular child over another one. So if there's siblings, and one always seems to be getting way more attention, something to kind of think about. They might demonstrate physical contact or affection towards that child, which appears either pretty outright sexual in nature or just always some sort of sexual overtones in play. So those are some adult indicators of sexual abuse. So let's shift a little bit and look at physical abuse. Some examples, indicators that a child is being physically abused. Unexplained bruises, we mentioned that before. Unexplained bruises, welts, cuts, or abrasions. We might see that in session. We might see a bruise. We might see scrapes and cuts, and they might be in just odd places. We can always ask about that. Wow, it looks like a pretty nasty scrape on your arm there. How'd that happen? And if there's nothing, or it just doesn't make sense, their excuse, that's an indication that there's something going on. Might have unexplained burns. So that's it's kind of, I guess, self-explanatory, but what seems to be most is cigarette burns. So there might be unexplained fractures or dislocations. So again, you might have a family member that, gee whiz, this is always happening, or how did that happen? Or we might see that in our room also. Actually, some of these, it'll seem like a repeat when I get to talk about domestic violence. Oh boy, another great topic. But there's some similar things here, that there's unexplained bruises, there's unexplained stuff, and excuses might be being made. Oftentimes those that perpetrate this, or the perpetrators that do this type of behavior, they know where to hurt someone where it doesn't show. So it's just the way it is. Some behavioral indicators of physical abuse is a child might be very wary of a particular individual or just of adults in general. They might be violent to animals or to other children. Sometimes that's a way of just expressing their own internal hurt and pain. Sometimes it's also what they've learned from an adult. It's actually can be used as unfortunately, a brainwashing technique. So a perpetrator can abuse a person, a child, and they might point to the animal or whatever that they just kicked or mutilated in some way and say, that could happen to you too. And so it's a way of keeping that victim down and not wanting to share anything because, that could happen to me. A child might be dressed inappropriately to hide injuries. Again, we see the same thing in adults that experience domestic violence. Here's a big one. Cringing or flinching if touched unexpectedly. So if a child is touched unexpectedly, where top of the head, back, whatever, where in a normal situation, it wouldn't mean anything, But if they flinch or cringe, something's going on. So these are just, again, things to watch out for. If the child can't recall how those injuries occurred, I don't know. Or they, the explanations I give just aren't the same. Last week you said it was this. This week you're saying it's this. I'm kind of confused here. That's another indicator. So the indicators of of a perpetrating adult, they may be vague or inconsistent about the details or the cause of injury. So, wow, your daughter, this happened. How did that happen? Oh, gee, I don't know. So they might be vague. They're just kind of trying to create distance. Obvious one here of child abuse, physical child abuse, is any shaking of an infant. If you see that has to stop. If there's any threats or attempts to injure a child, if someone says, if you do that, I'm gonna beat you, I'm gonna hit you, or what's going to happen next. Those are indicators that adult could be a very abusive person. If there's a delay in seeking any medical attention, so a child is injured, they obviously need to see a doctor, and it's just not happening. That's another indicator, because that adult knows if I get them in right now, there's going to be a lot of questions. But if I wait and there's some healing and it looks okay, I might not even have to take them in. The other sign of physical abuse by an adult to a child is any aggression towards a child in front of others. That child is probably experiencing a form of abuse. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, any of those. Excuse me. So neglect. This one isn't always thought about as abuse, but it is. It is a form of abuse. So indicators, physical indicators, inappropriate dress for the weather. Child's left on their own. They don't know what to wear, or they don't have anything else to wear. They've worn the same sweatshirt in summer for 6 days now because that's the only clothing they have. So that is a form of neglect. They might be very dirty, or they might be unbathed. And it's not... children get dirty, right? So it's not about that. It's more extremely dirty, chronically unbathed. That's a sign of neglect. Just to back up a little bit, any of these things, I know I've said it before, but any of these indicators don't necessarily mean that a child has been harmed. I can't say this enough. It just means that this is a possibility. Some things just occur because of life events. So but when we put a few together, that is when we know something is probably going on. Okay. Physical indicators, inappropriate dress, dirty, unbathed, inadequately supervised, left alone for periods of time, unacceptable periods of time. A child can be left alone, depending on the age, for a period of time, but what's acceptable and what is unacceptable?
Can I ask a question about that? Are there legal statutes for that?
There are not.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't read all the legal statutes. I'd be a basket case if I had to read all of that.
Right.
But as far as I know, there's no legal statutes about that.
Okay.
Child might be malnourished, not getting enough food. That's a sign of neglect. They may have rashes, other persistent skin disorders, and that can be caused by various things, obviously, poison oak, things like that. But here we're talking about lack of hygiene. So consistent rashes in areas that if they were clean would not occur. Again, we don't see all of that in our counseling rooms, but this is all things that we need to know about child abuse, so we have a bigger picture of what we're working with. Behavioral indicators, there might be a severe lack of attachment to other adults. And one of the reasons for that is because I've been so neglected, why would I want to attach myself to someone who should be caring for me? And so they keep distant. There's a flip side to that. Sometimes there's an over-attachment because they just want attachment so desperately that they will glom on to anyone. Other behavioral indicators, poor school attendance or poor performance. That's actually a pretty good indicator if a child's in school. You ask them, if you're seeing the child, you ask them, how's it going in school? I've got all F's. Wow. And then if you add that to other things you might be seeing, again, an indicator of abuse. They might have very poor social skills. I have poor social skills sometimes. We all do. Children do, because they're still learning. But if they're at that age, they should have some social skills, and they don't. Good indicator. They might be very demanding of affection or attention. Again, that wanting that attachment figure in their life so desperately. They may have no understanding of basic hygiene. They might have lots of cavities in their teeth. They don't know how to brush their teeth. No one's taught them how to do that. No one's taught them how to adequately bathe themselves or take care of fingernails or toenails or any of those common things. What are the indicators of an adult that is neglecting their child? Again, just failing to provide for the child, providing for their basic needs. Housing, nutrition, medical, psychological care. We see that here a lot, where parents are unwilling to get psychological care for their children. And sometimes that's because they know if someone talks to their child, they might be found out. They might fail to enroll their child in school. They might leave their child home alone. Again, extended, inappropriate, unacceptable time frames. They might be so overwhelmed with their own problems that they don't have the capacity to take care of their children. So they're putting their needs ahead of their child's needs. Sometimes they don't know any better. Sometimes that's just, I want to take care of myself more than I want to take care of my children. So these are just these indicators in adult behavior. Any questions so far? Have I given you enough? You want to leave now? We're going to have more. Emotional abuse. What are some indicators that a child is being emotionally abused? Bedwetting or soiling with no medical cause. This is common. Doesn't mean that a child who is still bedwetting is being abused. It's, there's other issues perhaps. They may be psychological, but it doesn't mean it's abuse. They might have frequent psychosomatic complaints. I have a headache, my tummy hurts, I feel sick. And if that's chronic, that's just an indicator. You might have prolonged vomiting or diarrhea. Sometimes that's from malnutrition. They have not attained significant developmental milestones. So they should be speaking at this, talking at this age. They should be walking at this age. They should be interacting with other children in a particular way at this age. And so there's a lot of milestones that aren't getting met. They may dress differently from other children in the family. They just may have a whole different way that they dress. That might be, well, it could be a lot of things. They could be dressing inappropriately. They could be dressing to attract attention. And by the way, that's a very common, I'm using quotation marks here, because that's also used inappropriately. So, they just want attention. No, it's not about attention. That's all they've got. That's the only thing they know. They might even been, and this, it's interesting, this comes out in the emotional abuse category. They might be being deprived of certain living conditions. So they don't get their own bedroom. They have to sleep with this person, or they have to sleep in the smallest room, or they have to sleep out in the garage. They're being isolated for some reason. So another indicator. Again, those indicators, the behavioral indicators, I don't know why I said again, but the behavioral indicators: depression, anxiety, withdrawal, aggression. Depression, anxiety, withdrawal, aggression. What was the last one there? That's a physical. So these are more behavioral. There's a lot of depression in a young child. If there's a lot of anxiety, if they're just withdrawing, they're just pulling away, isolating, kind of going into their shell. Or if there's a lot of aggression, there's emotional abuse going on. Most bullies have experienced emotional abuse, or physical abuse, or abuse of some kind. There might be some severe symptoms of self-destructive behavior. They might, at an early age, already be engaging in alcohol or drug use, so substance abuse. They might be overly compliant. So we've got both ends of the spectrums here. We got aggressive and we have overly compliant. So again, when we start adding these together, then we start, okay, there's some abuse going on here. Might be attention seeking. They might, when they're at play, whether in a therapy room or just in their normal behaviors, it's inappropriate. So they might be modeling or copy what they see at home. So if they're aggressive towards another, that's what they've noticed. If they're hitting, that's what they know. If they're putting people down all the time, that's just what they know. What are some indicators for adults that are abusing children? You might see this. They're always calling their child names, publicly humiliating the child. They might continually threaten the child with physical harm, or they might force that child to witness physical harm. So, like I mentioned earlier, that abused animal, they've been forced to watch that, or they've sometimes been forced to watch their sibling be abused. The adult might have totally unrealistic expectations for that child. You should be perfect. You should do this and you should do that. That's unrealistic for that age. They also might involve them in adult issues. So this becomes more in a parentifying way. So they're making them, they're kind of aligning with them as a parent, and That's inappropriate. They're a child. They need to be treated as a child. Okay. Spiritual abuse. That's the use of position, so the use of authority to make the child feel like they should do something or say something in a particular way in order that they're accepted by other Christians or by God. So this is in an abusive category. So just because you might hear someone say, good Christians don't do that, doesn't mean they're being abused. It just means, well, I have good hopes for you, and I just kind of wish you weren't doing that. But this is where, no, you have to do this. You'd better be praying every night. God doesn't love you if you do that. If you're nice to that person, God doesn't love you. So it's giving them a feeling of fear and of powerlessness. So another form of spiritual abuse, ingraining a sense of guilt or disappointment or harm if they don't get along with our spiritual program. As adults, as parents, one of our jobs is to protect our children. As they get older, it's to help them make their own decisions. As they get a little older, we're kind of just having a hard enough time just keeping them in the guardrails. But the goal is to let them make their own decisions. And so abusive, those that are abusing don't want that to happen. They want them to follow their agenda. Because if they follow their agenda, then they aren't going to step outside of the box and lose. That person isn't going to lose control. Kind of on a little different note, had a family member that had 3 children, and so they're adults. I think they're in their 30s. And the father was having a conversation with him one day, and the 3 kids were disagreeing with him. And he was, whoa, you're what's going on? And so 2 of them talked to him from a Christian perspective. And, he knew that they had become Christians. This person was an atheist. And so these 2 of them were kind of arguing from a Christian perspective, and the father just is shaking his head going, I don't know where I went wrong. Why would you become a Christian? That's what he was saying. He wasn't being abusive at all. I know the person. He wasn't being abusive at all. He was just going, and those 2, actually all 3 of them said, Dad, you taught us to think for ourselves. And so we're just doing what you taught us to do. He goes, how do you argue with that? So that's kind of the other end of abuse here. We want our children to be free thinkers. Psychological effects, anxiety, depression, anger, shame is a big one of spiritual abuse, psychological abuse. I mentioned dissociation. I think I mentioned dissociation earlier. What that is can be anywhere from a person just checks out a lot, or there's multiple personalities, so it's on a spectrum. PTSD, a lot of post-traumatic stress is happening. Self-destructive behaviors. A lot of trust issues happen. So we're kind of talking about the effects. And let me go back here. Is that in this one? Yes. So we can look at self-destructive behaviors being self-inflicted violence, which includes cutting and things like that, but also addictions of various types, whether it be, and I get to speak on addictions towards the end, I think. Addictions are behavioral addictions or substance addictions. All of them can be destructive. So a person might go into substance use, say, and that's a destructive behavior. And kind of a statistic I have from that is that 66% or 2/3 of those that are in substance abuse treatment programs have been abused as children. That's pretty high. So, what are the effects? What are the effects of sexual abuse? We just check for. Wait. One more here. Okay. Trauma. So we're kind of focusing on sexual abuse here, and one of the reasons is that it's pretty impactful to someone. Trauma. So the victim adapts either through those defense mechanisms I mentioned. They form parts of them, which is a defense mechanism. We call it ego states. There's a class on ego states here, where it's really they develop a lot of distorted beliefs about themselves. Sexual shame, so the view of themselves as a sexual being is really distorted, way out of proportion to what it should be, because there is no shame in being sexual. They might have a false guilt. So the victim might blame themselves for the molest or for the abuse. So this is really covering any abuse. It's a very, very common statement. I could have stopped it. I should have done something. It's my fault. Again, these get formed in early childhood, and that's the child's realm. They don't know any different. They just know inherently that they kind of seem to know inherently if I were better, they would treat me better. But that's not the case. Confused body boundaries. So have you heard of bubble space? So this is talking about bubble space. They don't have any boundaries because all of their boundaries have been violated. So they don't necessarily have boundaries. They don't recognize others' boundaries of space and touch. They might objectify others also. So that's also a boundary violation. So we're kind of going to transition out of all of the effects and all of the yuck here. And we're going to look at how we can help those that have experienced this. How we can help children, if we're seeing children, adolescents, young adults, older adults. We have clients here that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that for the very first time have acknowledged the abuse that occurred to them as a child. And they finally are dealing with it and working with it. How do we handle disclosures? What are the things that we do here? What are the first things we do as lay counselors?
Well, just in general?
In general.
Listen.
Very good. You passed the test. We listen. we can, reflective listening, reframing, all of those things that you've learned. We also validate the feelings. So we can't stress that enough. If that's all you come away with, as far as tools to use, that's enough. So when we get these clients, any client, but when we get some of these that are a little heavier, just listen. Be there. Don't panic. That's our first instinct, and believe me, it is. Oh my gosh, inside of me is kind of going, whoa, that is a lot. So we can't panic. We kind of have to check all of that. I will give you a tool that I used, and it just happened with me. It wasn't anything that I learned. It just happened. I saw a client. I think they were in their late 40s. They revealed the horrific physical abuse that they took as a child, and it was horrific. And it was I think it was my second session with him, and it came out. It just all started coming out, and I'm going into panic mode because I don't know exactly what to do here, but I'm going to be present. I'm going to be here. I'm going to listen. I'm going to utilize those few skills that I felt I had, and I'm going to be there. And he talked about a lot of it, and he said he's been in a lot of therapy and substance abuse treatment. So this is the first time I've let this out. And I will tell you, at the end of session, which actually went long, he left, and that's when I went into basket case. Oh my gosh, I was emotionally rocked. And so what I did is I got my phone out, I went to my pictures, and I just started thumbing through my family pictures. And it kind of grounded me. And so it just happened. It was very organic that I did that. God directed me, I guess, to do that. And so I like to pass that along, because we can be rocked by our clients, and we don't want to take that home. We don't have to. So it's just a way of grounding ourselves in reality. This is terrible, horrible. I'm so sorry it happened to them. It's not mine to carry out of here, though. So that can be a helpful tool. So we listen to the child. We accept what they say. We look at them directly, and we look at them warmly. If they're sharing some stuff, so I'll just kind of use one of you. Who wants to be a guinea pig here?
I will.
Okay. You don't have to say anything other than all of this horrible stuff has been happening to me. Just go ahead and say that.
All of this horrible stuff has been happening to me.
What's your reaction when I did that?
I have something to be ashamed about, or I did something wrong.
Yeah, so we don't want to turn away. We want to maintain eye contact. They might turn away, but we still want to be there. They turn away, we don't turn away. We just can't do that. So we want to be there for them, because when they look up, they're expecting help. And so we need to be there for them. So, and always be very warm. Yeah, wow, I heard that. Reassure them that they did the right thing by telling someone. Thank you so much. You did the right thing by sharing what you just shared. That's a brave thing to do. And those words can be very powerful. Maybe not necessary to a young child, but an adolescent or an adult. the brave part, because they've had a whole lifetime of not feeling very brave because they've been hiding all of this stuff. So tell them they did the right thing. Assure them that it is not their fault. Myself, I've used that phrase, I would have to say, hundreds of times. Our other therapists use that phrase a lot also. When this kind of stuff is occurring, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that this happened. It's just not. So we want that burden to be lifted from them. Let them know what you're going to do next. So this is very important. We may have to make a child abuse report. If all this is coming out, we will be making a child abuse report. We just need to let them know what we're doing. So we have to use a little bit of clinical judgment as far as what we say. Because if we say, I'm gonna have to file a child abuse report against your parents, against your mom, or against your dad, and so someone's gonna come out to your house. Well, I just put a lot of fear in that person. Mm-hmm. You just say, part of my job is to protect you, and I will take all measures I can, and we'll probably be talking about that later. Later meaning another session, because in the meantime, I'm going to be filing a report. Sometimes we don't see that child again, which is very unfortunate, but we have to do that. Sometimes we don't see them again because they've been pulled out of the home. Okay, good. They needed to. Sometimes we don't see that child again because they tell their parents what they said, and their parents aren't going to bring them back. Or CPS has paid them a visit at home, so they're not going to take their child back. So sometimes that unfortunately that does happen, but we do what we need to do. We can only take the steps that we can take, and they're all helpful steps. So we need to be aware that child may have been threatened or may be threatened if they reveal anything that they said in session. So we can assure that child or an adult, but we can assure that child that what we talk about is between you and me. Now, we went over some things early on in our session about confidentiality, and hopefully they grasp that. We really try to make sure that they do grasp that. So part of confidentiality is if there's any information that leads me to suspect any child abuse, I'm a mandated reporter, and I have to make the reports about that. So we want to make sure that child knows that, but we don't have to say it a second time, really. But we just have to know that they understand that we're there to protect them, but we might have to make reports. Again, we don't have to tell that young person at the time. So write down what the child says. It's really important to do that and to do it in their words. Record what you've seen, what you've observed. What are those indicators you picked up on? Or sometimes maybe you didn't quite pick up on them, or they were kind of in the back of your mind, and then they come out and say what has happened to them. Then the things might start clicking. Oh, that might explain that. And so you want all of that to be in your clinical notes. A couple of reasons for that. We want to know what, as clinical directors, Clarice and I want to know what you're experiencing, and whenever you have a case like this, to bring it to Clarice or myself. But we want to record what they said, not what we think they said, or what we inferred that they meant. So it has to be pretty clear. I think I say that here. Make certain you distinguish between what the child actually said and the inferences you may have made. So that will be important in a CPS report. Tell your supervisors as soon as possible. Never ask leading questions. Very important. Never ask, so, did this happen? Never ask those questions, because if this were to go to court, it will be, there's a good possibility of being thrown out. So never ask those types of leading questions. After they did this, did they do this? That's a leading question. Just let the information organically come from them. And again, if you're using those listening skills and validating their experiences, it's gonna come out. Yeah, never push for information or make any assumptions. Don't assume that somebody else has made a report. We can't assume that. Don't assume that, oh, that was 2 years ago. It's not happening anymore. No, it happened 2 years ago. It may or may not be happening now. It's still reportable, though. So our responsibility as mandated reporters is to protect those children as best we can. Any questions about any of that? I just threw out a lot of information there.
Is the mandated reporting stuff something that we go over in more detail?
I believe on the last class, Clarice will go over that. So mandated reporting, there are 5 areas where we are mandated reporters. So any information, that's the qualifier, any information that leads me to suspect child abuse, I guess I'll do it left to right for you. Child abuse, elder abuse, intent to harm yourself or others, if you're a danger to yourself, others, or property, or if there's an inability of you to take care of yourself. So if I have a client and they come in and man, I don't even see how they walked in here, and they're telling me all this stuff. They have no food at home. They have open sores and they can't take care of themselves. I need to get adult protective services in here.
So when you're talking about the abuse for a child, it's someone under 18. Mm-hmm. What if it's an adult, but they're talking about past abuse? Then you're not doing reporting because they're adults?
They're an adult, they can make that report themselves.
What if they have siblings at home?
So if that abuser still has access, so there's 2 things here. Mm-hmm. If that abuser still has access to children, and there's a reasonable suspicion that abuse might still be occurring, then we are mandated to report that.
Could you ask the client that? Are you fearful that your father might be hurting your sister? We can. It's kind of a leading question. That's what I was wondering.
But it's more, it would be more like, so this has happened to you in the home. We can say, just you? How does if we know what they have some brothers or sisters, we can ask, do your brothers or sisters know about it? We just don't want to lead them down a path that legally might come back to haunt us.
It's a minefield.
Yeah. CPS will ask, we might put on the report, or we might make a report. And whenever we make any of our reports, actually, we call the agency first. So we give them the information, this is what it seems to be happening, and blah, 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 and they'll go file a report. They might go, not really reportable. Yeah, that happened. Your client is, 20 years old now, and they have a 14-year-old brother at home or sister at home. Do you think that person is still abusing them? I don't know. I have no idea. It's not. Yeah, don't file a report. But we always call CPS. We kind of take their lead on that. And just call, ask them. Yep, file a report. Sometimes I just automatically say, file a report. And we don't always hear back about, we don't always hear back about what happened. Actually, I'd say we hear back about 30% of the time.
Do your clients who are under 18 have to have parental consent for visits here?
Okay, yes and no.
Okay.
So, preferably yes. Let's just say somehow a 14-year-old comes in. So as a lay counselor, that's the lowest age that you would be seeing. Say a 14-year-old comes in and wants counseling. And they come in, they don't have their, they might call, or let's say they call, I'm kind of making something up here, but they come in and they want some help. Let's just say they're being abused in the home. We'll just keep it in today's thing. They're being abused in the home. They're, this is happening and this is happening. We make an assessment at that time. Is this a competent 14-year-old? Do they have the capacity to act for themselves, to make, some reasonable decisions? Yeah, they do. So in a situation like that where their safety would be, could be in danger, yes, we can see them. We don't have to get parental permission. But in general, we always try to get parental permission. Sometimes we'll see an adolescent and their parents don't want them to come back in, but they come back in. And we have, their parents are not taking care of them. They're severely depressed. There could be a suicidal thing here, so I'm going to see you anyway. Doesn't matter. Okay. Let's see, where are we? Here's some dynamics. Post-revelation. So this is post-revelation, meaning the victim has shared, let's just say, with their family, or it's come out in session, and a CPS report has been made, and it gets, so obviously family is going to be involved. When the family accepts this revelation, so when they believe that child, and sometimes it's an adult, so the offender is confronted and denied contact. This is what should be happening. When the family acknowledges the victim, they should be taking that offender or taking the child out of the offender's contact. They should, if they accept the abuse, probably going to be some legal issues. CPS is involved, or police because parents, adults, they can file all sorts of reports, but if it's criminal, then, okay, we got some criminal issues. There's going to be some loss, and there's going to be a lot of drama. That's part of life, and unfortunately, it's a bigger role here. But if the family accepts all of this, they'll be willing to go through that. They will do that. They will actually get healing from this. The victim is provided opportunity for help. So they're going to accept, a child comes to mom and says, Daddy's been doing this to me, or this happened, and if mom goes, oh my gosh, that is unacceptable, so they're going to limit contact. They may make a report. They may confront. They should be confronting, and so there's going to be some drama. They're going to get help for that child. They might need physical help. They might need psychological help, but they're going to do that. Flip side, when the family rejects or disbelieves the victim, very different story. And unfortunately, it happens way too often when a child says, this happened, and the other parent or whoever it is says, you're lying. That didn't happen. So when they reject or they don't believe that victim, the victim is ignored. The offender is enabled to even have further contact and repeat the molest that they've been perpetrating. Or other forms of abuse might happen. So this happens also, so that if family doesn't believe it and the offender is not confronted, now there's almost like, I can get away with even more. Oftentimes the victim is actually punished for this, which just adds a whole nother layer of wounds and trauma. And when that has happened repeatedly, there's a lot of layers. It's called complex trauma. I do a lot of work in that area, and it's work. It's very rewarding work, but it's work. The lot of brave souls out there. The victim may be permanently scapegoated by family and others. So scapegoat just means, it's actually a biblical term, I think, just means all of our junk gets piled on you, and you're getting kicked over the edge to the burning pile of other goats down there. That's kind of what that child experiences. They're just, and they feel it. They really feel it. And it becomes a belief system within them. I'm the victim. I'm always going to, I'm the one I'm wrong. I'm not lovable. I'm not worthy. All of these belief systems evolve, and then they start operating out of that. It can be very damaging. So, let's see here. We're going to look at counseling. I'm just kind of flipping through these to see where I am, because this print is larger than that print, and it's easier for me to read. Okay. We're going to go through a few slides, and then I'm going to give you a vignette. And break up into groups of, two. So, first thing, establish trust and rapport. Listen, validate. You might just wind up building a relationship with that person over their interest or their needs, or oftentimes I like to just, what kind of music you listen to, what's your favorite subject, what's your worst subject, or what teacher do you like, or do you like school, do you hate school, any of those things that they might, you might build some type of relationship with. Art and music seem to be some that I connect with more. So if they say, doesn't matter what age, if they say, oh, I like this, I'll go, oh, what's that? I'll pull out my phone and I'll find them on Pandora or something, and I'll listen to it the next week and just step into their world, and they feel connected that way. Guide the child into understanding and awareness about what they've just talked about. So they might have shared things that they really don't know why they shared it. And so we just, okay, so we can go to those questions. It's not a leading question of, wow, what you told me, that sounds really hurtful, or this, or that sounds like you really feel attacked. Feel attacked every day, yeah. Some abuse, usually if I'm working with like an older sibling, they're protecting their younger siblings. So if they talk about that, one instance, Dad was severely beating the older brother, and Dad had to take a break, probably to go to the refrigerator and get another beer. My client, as he was probably, I think he was 12 or 13 at the time, grabbed his 10-year-old sister, took her under the house, literal under the house. He knew there was an opening and he could get them both in, and Dad wouldn't fit. And that's where they stayed until they knew Dad was asleep. And so we can guide them into some understanding and awareness that, wow, you're pretty brave. You protected your sister, didn't you? And yeah, I did. They're not going to feel proud about it, but they'll feel better about themselves. So we want to decrease or just eliminate any responsibility. It's not their fault. I think I've said that before. It's not your fault. It's just not your fault. Children don't always understand that, but if we tell them that, they will get it. We want to improve their verbal expression of it, so we want to work with them. We can use words. We can use, with children and adolescents, we can use feeling words. We can use emoticons, things like that. What do you point to the picture where you are right now, or when that happened, point to the picture, and then can you share a little more? Help me understand a little more about that. We don't always want to go, help me understand about that awful thing that happened, but tell me more about that feeling. We can go there. They can go there in safety. We don't want to re-traumatize them. We don't want them to have to tell their story over and over and over again. By doing that verbal expression and building rapport, we are automatically building their own feelings of self-worth or self-esteem, because finally somebody's listening to me. I'm worthy of being listened to. We're also going to help them with coping skills. So we're going to be giving them some tools that they can use when they feel overwhelmed. If they're in the home, let's just say there's a possibility this could happen again. We can't protect them from that actually happening other than a CPS report. We can put in a CPS report there's a threat of this happening when they get home. So when we call CPS, which we should be doing fairly quickly after anything like this, we're required to fill out a report within 24 hours or 36 hours, 24 hours. But if we call them and say, this is what's happening, and I'm afraid that this is going to happen when they get home, there's a good possibility they can send an officer out they'll communicate with the sheriff's department and quite possibly send an officer out. So a coping skill, I gave you one last week. Do you remember what that was?
The listing the items.
Yes.
The listing.
Five senses, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever you want to call it. Children can do that. They can list objects. They can list colors. They can touch things. They can smell things. They can hear things. So we can work with them on that. Another coping, it's not really a coping skill. Yeah, that's another tool. I won't use that. We can give them, wow, when you talked about that, and let's just say they start talking about how anxious they are and their breathing is going like this. We can give them some breathing skills. And we don't have to do it complicated at all. We want them, because if they're gonna start breathing like this, they're gonna hyperventilate. It's not gonna help them at all. Hyperventilating leads to more hyperventilating, which means to falling over. So we can just, whoa, here's kind of a thing you can do it, and it's really fun. Oh, really? Well, you can just, when you breathe, you just breathe. But when you exhale, you put your lips together and just make this noise. And what that does, two things. The main thing, slows down that exhalation process, so oxygen remains. And so it's there's a better exchange of oxygen. The other thing, it's a somatic. It's a feeling that they get to experience. So they feel like they're doing something. Works with adults great too. So those are two things that you can use. Games can work right there in your counseling room, or if you're at home, games can work. Simple games. Jenga is a great one. Most kids know what that is. And here's the thing with kids and games. Who cares about the rules? just have fun. No, you can't hold it and pull that one out. No, you just have fun with it. Some board games, whatever. The checkers, they're going all over the place. Who cares? It's just about connecting. Some tools to give them, and okay. Who can touch you without permission? So this is again this bubble space thing. Who can touch you without your permission? That would be. We can talk about it. So that safe adult can touch them, if they need to be held. But basically, if a person's been abused and if they don't want to be touched, they don't have to be touched. Ask about where their bubble space is. So this gives them a little bit of control, a sense of themselves. Like, oh, no, I don't, where's your bubble space? Where don't you like people to be with you or near you? Is it out here? Is it right here? And just kind of walk through that with them without being that person getting in their bubble space. So you don't want to demonstrate it that way. You want to demonstrate it, depending on the abuse, you might not want to do this. So you give them an object. It could be your pen. It could be anything that's around you, and go, where would you place that? Where would you put that? And that's the edge of your bubble space. Where is that? And they'll do that. So it's non-confrontive. You're not touching them. You're not making any movements towards them. It's something they get to do. Define times when it's okay to leave. So when it's okay to leave somebody's presence. It's okay to leave when that one person comes into the room. It is okay. Experiment with hand signals for stop or stay away. It doesn't seem like it's much, but it gives a little sense of control. So they, no, stop, whatever it is for them. It might be stop, or it might just be go away. I don't want that. But we kind of want to work with them and to give them those tools ahead of time so that they can use them. And if it's violated, then that's just more information, more validation that this person is abusing them. Kind of what I just talked about. Find a voice role play. So that no word is very important. Go away. Stop. I don't like that. You can't do that is really not a good one because that's confrontive. It's too confrontive. The person, a good chance they're going to say, yes, I can. So you want to stay more with, stop, no, I don't like that. I'm uncomfortable with that. That doesn't work for me. So those are when I'll be giving you a vignette that this might come into play, where you teach a child that they can do that with people, that they can say, that doesn't work for me. I don't like that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I'm uncomfortable. And so it's going to be telling that person. Now they may still continue, but our client feels like they have some tools to use because prior to they probably didn't have any. Practice ways with them of asking for help. 911. That's always, call this. Call this number. Is there a neighbor that you trust that you could run over to? So it's kind of going to be in their realm how they might be able to ask for help. You're going to get a lot more information of what would work for them. So I'm going to give you a vignette. Do you want to take a quick break?
I would love to use the restroom.
Okay, great. Amanda, a 12-year-old girl, sits quietly across from you in the counseling room. Her mom brought her in for therapy because of her being afraid to go into the guest bedroom by herself and because Amanda does not play with other children. After 4 sessions with Amanda, she mentions the games the babysitter used to play with her. When asked about the games, Amanda lowers her head and says, "The touching games." She says the babysitter would touch her, then have Amanda touch the babysitter in the same area and in the same way. The babysitter told Amanda that this was their own secret game and to not tell anyone else. Amanda did not like those games but was afraid to tell anyone. So that's the vignette. So you can spend a few minutes being the counselor and the client and swap. Okay? All right, so let's go on. Adults molested as children. I'll probably kind of skim through this because there's a lot that we've already covered, I think, especially as far as how to work. But there can be weight issues, obesity or anorexia, bulimia. So those are behavioral ways to especially anorexia and bulimia, there are usually ways to have some sort of control over life, because I haven't had control over life. Adults, so this is, you're working with an adult that's been molested as a child. They might have already gone through some of their therapy, or they've already maybe presented it to somebody at some time in their life, but they're still struggling with things. These are some things to look at is so they can't protect themselves, or they feel that like they can't protect themselves. They feel like they can't protect their children. Sometimes they're actually attracted to offenders. And this is common enough, and it's just a way of sometimes, well, there's many factors. One is it's not that I want to recreate what happened to me, but I want to make that connection different than what it was. So a lot of depression, a lot of self-loathing. I don't like myself. I feel terrible about myself. Or they might be Superwoman or Superman. They do everything. They can do everything, and they might be really good at it. But at points in their life, they fall apart. They might be married to an offender. They might take on the role of a victim or an enabler in any relationship they're in. They may become an offender. Again, not a done deal at all, because the statistics I said earlier. Collect offenders in friendship. So again, trying to establish a different relationship with an offender than what their experience was. And the other side of that is let me go back here. Attracted to offenders, yeah. The other side of that is that's all I know. I don't know anything different. It's comfortable to me, even though it hurts. There's a sense of comfort in it, because to step out of that is unknown territory. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I kind of know what's going to happen here. I don't like it, but at least I know. So there is that. That's pretty common too. So you want to make safe space. Same thing you're going to do with any client. You talk about what's going on, what's the presenting problem. You're going to want, with adults, you're going to want, what are their current relationships? What are they like? They may be in a domestic violence situation. And when we talk about domestic violence, we'll find out that we might have a client that's in a horrific domestic violence situation, and that is not reportable. Not reportable at all. What does the client want to achieve in counseling? Sometimes they will not know, but they're there. One of our therapists is a solution-focused therapist, so it's a way of doing therapy. Solution-focused brief therapy, SFBT. So it's very question-oriented. It's very goal-oriented, and it's usually briefer therapy. But a question that she presented to me, and I use it in sessions often, is that, what are your best hopes for our time together today? Sometimes they don't know, but most of the times they do. I just want to talk. Great. We're here. We can do that. We want, as with child and adolescent clients, we're going to be talking about boundaries. What are the boundaries? Bubble space is a boundary. saying no is a boundary. So we're going to be talking about boundaries usually, offer them other possibilities than the way they are currently doing things. Always, I think verbalization is important. Help them to talk about it and discuss what they're going through, what they're experiencing. So as far as in the boundary realm, we're going to be working with them in how to express those boundaries. So sometimes just saying no is not the best way to do it. So we'll work with the client in what that means. And have you heard of Henry Cloud, John Townsend, Boundaries? Yeah, they're like the Christian gurus of boundaries work. They came out with a book called Boundaries in the 80s. Still prolific today. They're great. They're just awesome. One of their illustrations is backpacks. So a boundary, and this fits especially with adults molested as children, is that there's a tendency to own everybody else's stuff. Because if they do that, then they have either some control or they feel better about themselves. So, backpack. If we're carrying everybody else's stuff in our backpack, so we got all these rocks in our backpack. Oh my gosh, life is really hard, and I'm not doing well, and I've got this to do, and I got that to do, and oh man, and I got to take care of them, and I got to make sure this works, or they're going to get mad, or whatever, and I've got all these rocks in my backpack. Well, a boundary is taking those rocks out and giving them back to who they belong to. And that's even some verbiage we can use. I realized I'm carrying around a rock that's not mine, and I'm going to give it back to you. Recognize the abuse that has occurred regardless of the accuracy of the memory. Memories are not always accurate. They're if it's a memory that's been around a long time, sometimes we replay those memories and we might shift a little bit here. And the more times, it's kind of like the phone game, the telephone game. If any of you played that, by the time years go by, what actually happened might be a little different. Doesn't matter. The abuse happened, and that's what we want to focus on. We want to validate all of those things that they're experiencing, all their feelings, all their core beliefs about them. It makes sense that you'd feel that way. This happens a lot when other people have experienced this. They feel the same way. They feel like they're worthless, or they feel like they have to control everything. It's very common. And so you just kind of normalize it for them. Name it to tame it. I am a survivor of molest. Common, we can actually change that to I'm a thriver. I've survived and I'm thriving now. So we want to give them tools and skills so that they can thrive. We want to assess for any self-inflicted violence. We'll talk about that in a minute. What that means. Don't press for details or memories. So if they share them, great. That's fine. We don't want to press them for that. We might take them into a very painful place, and it's not going to go well for them. It's going to hurt them. So we don't want to do that. Make sure they have had some physician visits, that they've taken care of things that might have been a medical situation. If they're on any medication, antidepressants, any of that, just check in. You're not the experts. Psychiatrists are the experts. We just want to make sure. So you said you're on this, just kind of checking in, or you've been consistently doing that in the morning, like you said? Yeah. Okay, great. Refer if necessary. So if something comes up that's out of our scope of practice, say, like it's medication, we think you need this, or it's a medical issue, refer to that. Or if this is an area that that you're not comfortable working with for whatever reason, then talk to Clarice or myself and we refer. So that's a way of referring. You're just referring back to us that there's that I'd like to refer, because it can be really hard to work in some areas. And I think Clarice talks about it at the end. If you decide to be a lay counselor here, there's a part on the form. Is there any type of client you prefer not to work with? So we want to honor that. We will not assign those clients to you. Okay, we want to identify any triggers, if possible. What happens? A client might get triggered right in our room. And wow, you probably don't want to say that. But I noticed that when that subject came up, when you talked about that, you really shifted. You just kind of went limp in your chair. And so just acknowledge it. Don't shy away from it. You're hearing them and you're seeing them, and that's very needed. It's also might be a trigger. That's might be how they cope with things. And we just want to be there. We want to always help them find their voice, not our voice. I think you should do this. We want to give them options. We want them to come up with solutions. We might have information that might help that, but we're not going to be telling them. We're not giving advice. You need to do this. We want them to find their voice. They've been controlled enough. They don't need it anymore. Prioritize self-care. Make a list with them. Check in with them. Encourage them. It's kind of the same. If they have some concerns, say, I can't, this always comes up, it affects me, and I can't take care of my kids, or I can't take care of the rest of my family, I can't get my schoolwork done, I can't do this. Well, let's look at doing some self-care. We can use some of those grounding tools, because it's the same as the proverbial oxygen mask coming down on the plane. Put your oxygen mask on first. We can't help others if we don't have the capacity ourselves. So if we do some self-care, that gives us capacity. Any questions on any of that? So a little bit on self-inflicted violence. And I think we'll get out of here in about 10 minutes. That's just physically hurting oneself without suicidal intent. Basically what it is. Self-inflicted violence comes in many forms. One of the common ones that you hear a lot about in recent years is cutting. That's one. Not a suicidal intent. It's a way of feeling. Mostly that's a way of feeling. It's a way of control. So other ways of self-inflicted violence is hitting themselves in the head with fists, banging heads against the wall, and even in the category of just taking a completely insane risk. I love jumping off of 2-story buildings. Yeah. I jumped off of a 1-story building once. I will never ever do that again. This is going to be on tape, isn't it?
We have to hear the story now.
No. Years ago, I think I was 13, a buddy and I broke into a church. And the real reason is just to see if we could do it. So we parked our bikes, and we climbed up on the roof. I don't remember how we got up on the roof, but we got up on the roof, and there was vents, and we could open the vents, and we could get into the building because we were small enough. And we just had fun. Just, oh, wow, this is cool. We could do this. And we walked around. Climbed back up the vents to get back down. And again, I can't remember how we did that. It might have been climbing up a rain gutter or something. All I know is when we got back up on the roof, there was a security vehicle going around. And I'm going, oh, Bobby, we're in trouble. And I said, there's a sand pile over there. I'll watch, you jump. Okay, it's safe, jump. And so he jumped. It wasn't a huge sand pile, I realized, because when Bobby jumped, the sand went. When I jumped, there was no sand. I was limping for quite a while, and it slowed me enough down where I got an escort home. So that's so totally unrelated to this whole thing, other than jumping off of a building. So again, the purpose is regulation of emotional pain, relief from emotional pain. Sometimes it's just about feeling the pain, and when I feel it, I feel different, and I'm good. That's all it is. When cutting's involved, this could be a whole session right here, but when cutting's involved, there's certain ways that you can cut fairly safely, and there's ways that you can cut that, so if you're cutting crosswise, a client's cutting this way, it's fairly safe. If they're cutting down this way, the tendons aren't keeping you away from the crucial arteries and veins. So we want to see where our client, if they say they come in and they've been cutting, I'm just going to stay with cutting here for a while, is that we want to be there for them. We don't want to shame them. We don't want to say, well, that's a stupid thing to do, because it's not. It makes sense for them. There's a reason they do it. And so we just want to ask, kind of up front, so do you mind if I ask where you're cutting? Most of the time they'll go, oh, it's, I've been cutting up here, or I've been cutting on my thigh. Okay. Would you mind showing me? You don't have to. I'm just, and so they might show you, and so it's the way of looking at, okay, oh, these are old scars, or that one's fairly new, and maybe that's the one they told you about. So just a way of, again, stepping into their world. They're not, when someone is any type of self-inflicted violence, they're not the enemy. They're not, they're not, it might be a dysfunctional behavior, but they're not a dysfunctional person. They're just doing whatever they can. Dissociation often occurs, sometimes at the time of cutting. The interesting thing about self-inflicted violence, and we're not cutting. I think cutting in women is higher than in men, but the other types of self-inflicted violence is higher in men than it is in women, especially the hitting. Many of those that do self-inflicted violence were abused in some way as children. It doesn't mean that they were, it just means that many were. So you can't just automatically put them in a box. Oh, you're cutting. Well, who did what to you? You can't just do that. Psychotic, different types, kind of already talked about a little bit, but there actually is removing or amputating body parts. Oh my gosh. I haven't run across any of that, but it is real, and that is where dissociation actually occurs. I'm not sure what voices. Voices direct the self-inflicted violence. So they're hearing voices telling them to do these things. So there's some other psychological issues going on. Organic, there's physical or chemical malfunctions within them. Rocking, head banging, lip biting, all of that is just ways to cope with what's going on. The typical self-inflicted violence, they're not psychotic or organically induced. They're basically a way of coping with what is going on or has gone on. So we have cutting, burning, picking. That sounds like really picking, but it is. It's a form of self-inflicted violence. Trichotillomania, which is hair pulling, that's self-inflicted violence. It's in that category of control and of feeling something. If I feel that pain, it brings me some sort of comfort. To us, it doesn't make sense. To them, it makes perfect sense. Scratching, hitting oneself, intentional bone breaking. And so, again, I mentioned we want to show, we want to be there for them. We want to be empathetic. We want to step into their world as much as possible. Be aware of that possibility or the potential. It's always there, just to feel disgusted with them. Really again, or why did you do that? It's a normal human reaction. We just have to check that. We just have to be aware that comes up, and we have to check it. Happens all the time when in supervision today, supervising all of our professional therapists, and something like this came up. It's called countertransference. So when they do something that affects me and I want to counter that in some way, I have to check it. I gotta set it on a shelf, figure it out later, because our role as a lay counselor is to be there for our clients, 100%. Watch out for your desire to control, or watch out for any frustration. And again, that it's a symptom. Self-inflicted violence is a symptom of a deep internal wound. They are trying to find comfort or make sense of their world as they experience it. And so we want to be in that world as best we can. We've covered a lot of ground today. And a lot of heavy stuff. Fortunately, we don't give tests, so you don't have to remember all of this. It's in your book. If you become a lay counselor here and this comes up, you have that reference book. You have notes you've taken. Always come to Clarice or myself, and we'll walk you through, what to do in any of these situations. So I thank you for just being here today. And I know the only reason you came because you knew it was air conditioned, right? So Clarice is teaching next week, and so I will be teaching the week after that. So I will see you in 2 weeks. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.